This is Mrs. Palmer Quay, and I want to talk to you for a little bit about a system of note-taking called Cornell Notes. This is not the only way to take notes from reading a textbook or listening to a teacher, but it is one that works well when the material is organized like you usually have in a textbook. And since I will be taking a look at your note-taking, at least at the beginning of the semester, I thought I would give you some more information on this particular method because I think it is one that can be very helpful. Why take notes at all? I mean, can't we just read the stuff and remember it? Well, unfortunately, reading by itself does not bring remembering, but reading plus writing often improves your remembering. A good set of notes can help you work on assignments and prepare for tests, and since as a homeschooler you are having to do a lot of this work on your own at home, anything that can help you should be practiced. Good notes also help you organize and process. That means think about the facts and information that are in the textbook. And then these are the steps. If you record, review, and recite the material, you get much better recall when it comes to the tests. Here's a curve that shows what happens. If you start here and you don't know anything about any information and you've read your chapter or you've listened to your teacher, well, at the end of that first day you have learned as much as you will ever learn. You've learned 100%. But as the days go on, if you never go back to that material, if you just let it sit in your brain, it just kind of floats away. And so after day 2, you're down to knowing about 40%, and by the time you get down to a month later, day 30, only about 2 or 3% of whatever you knew at this moment at the end of the first day is still in your brain, because you've had a lot of other stuff go into your brain, and we just don't we make room for things by throwing out old information we're not using. But if you take the time to review on day 2 and to review and a week later and to review again some more time after that, maybe taking 10 minutes the first time and 5 minutes the second time, you keep on refreshing your mind for these facts and information that you need to learn, and it stays there because you are remembering it. You are able to recall it, and it will stay with you. So how do you take Cornell Notes? Well, Cornell Notes has this kind of funny setup where you take your piece of paper and you're dividing it across the top and you're dividing over here on the left. They recommend 2.5 inches. I'm not going to go out with a ruler or anything. And there also is a place across the bottom of the very last page where you would write more information. And different things go into each part of that. As you see on this top line across the top, that's where you put down what you're taking notes on, what topic are you studying, what chapter or module are you reading, or what learning target you're completing. You might also put the source over here if you are working from a learning target and you've got several different textbooks. You can also quickly write your source so that you will keep track of where you got that information from. This big section here, this big fat right-handed column, is where you put your class notes. And this is where you start when you start working with the Cornell Note system. So step one is to record your notes in this big section on the right. You want to use the main idea of the material, and I'm going to talk primarily if you're working from a textbook because that's where I see most of the students in my class using this, but use the main idea as headings in your section, and you would use bullets, which I don't have you shown here, but that's where you have these little dots for each of the points that fall underneath that. So basically over here you're going to create a series of paragraphs that will contain a main idea and some details underneath. Skip some space, give yourself some room. If you find you're confused about something, give yourself more room so you have some space to write in the explanation, and use things like abbreviations or graphic organizers, which are diagrams, or pictures, things that can help speed up your note-taking and help you understand what it is you're trying to convey much more easily. After you have recorded the notes, the next step is review. Record and then review. You look over your notes and you make sure you can understand what you wrote, because they're not going to do any good if you can't remember what those little diagrams or arrows or abbreviations stood for. When you review, you go back through and you highlight or you underline the important information. use any other resources that you have to fill in areas of and clarify areas of confusion. Perhaps you need to rewrite messy parts so that you get this section over here on the right. You review it, you look it over, you make sure that you know what's going on, and then you write yourself some questions in this little column on the left. Questions that would serve as prompts to help you study. So if you are writing information over here about the scientific method, then your question would be, what are the steps of the scientific method? Or scientists start with what when they're trying to figure out a problem? The third step is to recite the notes, and this means to cover over the answers so you can't see them anymore. They're hidden underneath this piece of paper. And you use the questions that you've written on the left to prompt you as to what was over here that's being hidden. So you read your questions, and if you've planned good questions, then you can answer it. If we're talking about the scientific method again, your question would be, list the first step in the scientific method, and then you would try to say that. And depending upon which source you're using, it could be that you have make a hypothesis or you have a question about something, but you would be using your questions written on the left to prompt you to recite the correct answer and say it out loud. Find yourself a quiet space and listen to yourself talk. After you have written all of the notes on the particular section or topic, you also want to take time to summarize it. So on the very last page on the bottom, you can draw a line across that, and you can summarize the key points of this topic. You want to ask yourself, how would I explain this to someone else? You don't have to write down everything that you've included in the notes on the rest of the page, but just the most important stuff, telling someone what they really need to know. Here are some other tips on taking text notes, and since you again will be working mostly from the textbook, the first tip is to think about the reading. Think about how things are connected in this section to some section you read yesterday or last week. Pay attention to new words or terms or points that the author seems to be making over and over again, because that usually is a hint that it's something that's important. And so create your own questions about those new words. What does a word mean? Use it as a vocabulary quiz, or is there something that has been restated several times? Make that part of your question. And pay attention to the diagrams, the charts, the visual aids that there is in the textbook, because they're usually included because they are important things. Pay attention to how the textbook is organized, because this can help you figure out what the main ideas are. What is the section heading? Put that down as the main idea. Are there summary points at the end of the chapter? Read back through them and see if you have all of those points listed in your notes. Have you included something about every single graphic, every picture or diagram? And know where to find the index and the glossary, the definition of all those terms, because of course you need to make sure you know what those terms mean. So again, take down the most important ideas. Be brief but be clear. Use your own words when you're writing the summary. Use symbols or abbreviations, and take a look at the textbook review questions when you're writing your own study questions, because those will help you determine what are good questions for this chapter, at least what the author thought were good questions. As I said earlier, when you get ready to review, you cover the right side of your notes, you hide those notes, and use the study questions that you prepared on the left to see if you can remember what you had written down. Quiz yourself out loud so that it's, sometimes it just helps to say it out loud. It helps you remember if you hear yourself say it as well as thinking it. Also helps you pay attention to what you're doing. Your mind is less likely to wander off on a rabbit trail. And sometimes you could even cover the right side with a blank piece of paper and write out the answers instead of just speaking it. So there's a variety of ways that you can review. It's important to look over your notes frequently, especially when there's a section in the textbook that you're having trouble with. And we're working in more advanced science concepts here in high school. I know there are people in my classes who find some of these really difficult. But looking over your notes, making sure you've understood them, look for other resources if you need to clear up areas of confusion. Recite your information because reciting brings you recall. If you go and look up Cornell Notes on the internet, you'll be able to find examples of many different subject matter, sample notes from different subjects. And we will be practicing this in class. I will be looking at your notes at least a little bit in the beginning of the semester, so that hopefully this will help you get the most out of your textbook. See you in class.